Wolf Creek is a very tricky film to look at, and it's a film that really seems to split the camp on people's opinions of it. There's some people who think it's a complete ballfest, it's the worst thing ever made, that nothing happens in it, and even when things start to happen, it's still not interesting. There's others who feel the film glorifies the torture of its main female stars. What does he know? And there's others who see it as a very raw and hard-hitting horror film that pulls no punches in its depiction of what the characters actually go through in this film. Me, I kind of fall into the camp of enjoying it, even though I know I really shouldn't. From the way it's shot and framed, it can really make you feel uncomfortable in some of its scenes, and if you allow it to suck you in, it can downright shock you. Make no mistake, this is not a comedy, and you probably won't be laughing when watching this video either. But you've already clicked play, which means I'm hopefully getting paid for this. Following on from my Scream retrospective, a series that prided itself on following the rules of horror, Wolf Creek doesn't even attempt to place itself as a horror film with rules. It's realistic, shocking, plays with audience expectations, and its scares don't come from any real jump-out moments, but more from the atmosphere generated on screen. The score is subtle and only adds to the build, and it really is one of the most terrifying films I've ever seen. And yes, I will be talking about all those things in this video. So if I've managed to sell the film for you in any way based on that opening spiel, stop watching now and go and watch the movie. Then come back and re-watch this review. That way I get 2 views for the price of 1. My experience with the film occurred when I was in Melbourne in the middle of my travel year, staying in a hostel where a group of guys who were about to make the drive to Wolf Creek Crater put the film on. The Wolf Creek Crater is a meteorite impact crater which can be found in Western Australia, and it's a popular site for people visiting the country. It's also in the middle of nowhere. I never went there, and after watching this, I'm kinda glad I didn't. The film, released in 2005, marketed itself as being based on true events, and while that's not technically true, it does take its inspiration from the death of a backpacker, and the way the film is shot, in an almost documentary-type way, does give it a very realistic feel, not unlike the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film pretty much features 4 main characters: British-born backpackers Liz and Christy, Sydney-born tag-along Ben, and outback rogue Mick Taylor. The first half of the film revolves around the 3 backpackers and their journey to the crater. As someone who has backpacked and hitchhiked along the east coast of Australia, these sequences do strike a particular chord with me. From the hostel parties, to the sleeping on beaches, to just the endless car journeys with seemingly nothing but open road and wilderness for hours upon hours. It is something I can really identify with, and it reminds me of the time I managed to get a ride from Cairns, Australia to Welshy Beach, which was up to 8 hours of driving, so a lot of the scenery seen in the film's opening I can vouch for. However, whereas the film has a rotating system of drivers, my driver, who was determined to get to Welshy by a certain time, wouldn't stop for anything. So at one point, he's got a hot dog in one hand, he's got a drink in the other, he is steering the car with his knees, and between his legs he has an empty bottle which he's urinating into. This is a man on a mission, and I apologise right now for the picture that's probably flowing around in your heads. If you need to go to the bathroom, now's the time. Also, unlike other films where the mobile phone does not work argument can be seen as a cliche, when you backpack, you generally don't have a mobile phone with you, or, more than likely, you end up in an area where they just will not work. This was before the age of touchscreen iPhones where you could reach every sector of the planet through the power of your mind. If you get lost out in the wilderness, believe me, you're on your own. And the film goes a long way to showing this, with many shots just showing how there is nothing for miles and miles, only the speck of the car or the travellers far off in the distance. It's both beautiful and haunting at the same time. Something else I'd like to comment on though is that the characters, for me at least, come across as real and likeable. They're enjoying their freedom, and when the twist comes, they're terrified and you buy it. The 3 main characters, Liz, Christy and Ben, also come with their own minor complications. Liz likes Ben, Christy likes Ben. Ben likes Liz, but Ben supposedly has a girlfriend back in Sydney. Yeah, like that would stop him. Now, let me clarify. For anyone out there who's ever backpacked, when it comes to the morals of relationships, be they casual or long-term, they usually get left behind back at the airport. Now, there probably are a few exceptions, but look at it from this point of view. You are in a foreign country meeting people from all around the world. You're free of rules and responsibilities, you're going to be getting drunk, you're going to be mingling. What else do you think you're going to be doing? But unlike other films, these complications, if you could call them that, are handled in a normal and completely believable way. Admittedly, this was a subplot that was explored more fully in the director's cut, but it was taken out because it complicated matters unnecessarily, and I think the film is better for it. I'll jump into the movie at this point, as it's here that things really start to happen. While on the road, Liz pulls into Emu Creek for a fuel and bathroom stop, where Ben makes a vlog and gets some admiration from the local talent. Well, it certainly looks that way.
Graham, nice to meet you, Graham. I'm Ben. This one too? Yeah, mate.
While Liz freshens up, Christy basically writes off any potential lovers triangle subplot by telling Ben to go for it with Liz.
Don't go dicking her around, alright? Because she's totally brilliant. If you hurt her, I'm going to have to kill you.
Right, from the start, I gotta say how refreshing it is to see this in any sort of movie. If this were a romantic comedy, Liz would appear, see them talking, and never talk to Ben again, thinking he doesn't like her, which would lead to a number of hilarious antics where they would both avoid talking to each other due to this misunderstanding until the end of the movie, where true love would conquer all and they'd end up together with Christy possibly finding love with a local Aussie hunk. Yeah. That isn't this movie. Inside the bar, the locals swoon over the girls before getting confrontational with Ben in a mission to discover who the alpha male really is.
Me and me mates are going to see if your girlfriends would be interested in a little bit of a gangbang.
You know when some random dick makes a comment that you know isn't funny, but his friends still laugh just because they're his friends? That's this scene. The trio leave and continue their drive to the crater and begin their 3-hour hike up to see it. When they arrive, they take a few hours to relax, shield from the rain, possibly get stoned, and Liz and Ben acknowledge their feelings for each other, and eventually make the trek back to the car. Only now, the car won't start and all their watches seem to have stopped. With the car immobile, Ben does what any man would do when a car stops working. He pops the hood and starts touching things. Seriously, we all do it. Something I've always liked here is that the film seems to be flirting with its intended genre. Earlier in the film, Ben talks about possible alien sightings, and now, at the crater, the car and watches have all stopped running, making you think that something supernatural might occur. It's a nice build, and it shows that something just isn't quite right. With no other option, the trio settle down for the night in the car, but incoming lights get them outside where they meet a seemingly innocent truck driver called Mick Taylor.
What the bloody hell are you mob doing out here?
To save you from any shocking twists, I'll say it now. This guy is fucking scary.
Where you from, mate?
Sydney.
Poof, the capital of Australia.
Mick informs them that he's heading south and offers to repair the broken car part by towing them to his camp a little down the road. Faced with the option of a replacement part or staying still and hoping someone else drives by, they allow Mick to tow them. The journey lasts a lot longer than expected as Mick leads them further into nowhere, only now they have no idea where they actually are. Arriving at Mick's camp, he gives them some water to allow them to freshen up.
Nothing like rainwater from the top end.
And we get a little of his backstory, all actually foreshadowing events that will follow later in the film.
What'd you do there?
Head shooter.
And through a seemingly innocent remark, we see the friendly mask start to slip.
Saying cool stuff like, that's not a knife. This is a knife.
Seriously, that look still creeps the hell out of me, and it's made even worse given how long he just sits there and holds it.
What do you actually do?
I can tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
And after that uncomfortable scene, Mick eventually begins work on replacing the broken car part for them. Before long, the trio all fall asleep, with Liz awakening the next evening, bound and gagged in the nearby office trailer. It's at this point that the film switches entirely to Liz's point of view, and we see pretty much everything through her eyes. Managing to free herself, she discovers the car Mick had been working on has been completely gutted, and Ben and Christy are gone. The next sequence really does make me feel uncomfortable, so it's not something I'll be spending too much time on. Liz follows Christy's screams and spies her tied and gagged being tortured by Mick. This is without doubt one of the most uncomfortable scenes I can remember watching, and even now it still turns my stomach. We see the whole thing from Liz's point of view, and it makes the whole thing very uncomfortable as Mick takes enjoyment out of Christy's pleas. Thinking fast, Liz sets fire to the car and engine, which draws Mick outside, allowing her to sneak in and try and comfort an almost hysterical Christy. Mick returns moments later, but before he can follow through in his torture threat, Liz pulls a gun on him. Watching this scene in the hostel, both in Melbourne and when I was in Wellington in New Zealand, you just got the impression that the whole room was holding their breath. Liz tries to finish Mick off, but in a moment I find very human, she can't fire off the gun and just hits him with it. You may roll your eyes at this, but I've always felt this to be a very human reaction. This is probably the first time she's ever held a gun, let alone fired one. She's terrified, and she's just shot a man. She really doesn't know what to do or how to handle it, and she's panicking. Liz frees Christy, and the two girls escape into Mick's truck, but with no keys, Liz has to re-enter the garage. Standard horror convention? says he grabs her. He doesn't, and Liz manages to find the keys and start the truck, although now Mick is up and lets off 2 shotgun rounds into the truck's front screen. Liz floors the accelerator, which Mick manages to avoid, and then drives off. Mick gives chase, leading the girls to come to a stop at a cliff edge. Thinking fast, Liz and Christy push the truck off the cliff and then scale down the cliff's edge. Mick arrives and begins inspecting the scene. I love this shot with Mick silhouetted against the truck light. It makes him look ominous and intimidating, with the musical score just teasing the audience. Deciding to fully inspect, Mick heads down to the truck wreck while the girls climb up. Unable to steal the van as Mick has taken the keys, they head back to camp hoping to find another car. As Liz notes, they're in the middle of nowhere. Leaving Christy behind, Liz orders her to run for help if she's not back in 5 minutes. Now, I'll be honest, at this point, I felt that the character of Liz was becoming more of what a cliched horror character would sort of do in these situations, and not what a normal person would do in these situations. Up until now, she's acted in a very human type way, but it's when she gets back to the camp that she starts sort of taking on this sort of horror movie character as opposed to acting like a real life person. And I can understand why she's got to go back to the camp. They need to go back to the camp to get a car. They're in the middle of nowhere, they need to get away. But it's what she does at the camp which doesn't really feel realistic to me. Liz heads back to the site and discovers a garage containing many cars and trucks that Mick has collected over the years. Did she just pick up a knife? She just picked up a knife. Awesome. Scouring the scene, she discovers clothes and belongings from Mick's previous victims, and even a video camera showing that Mick has been doing this for a very long time, and then discovers, through a quick view over the footage shot by Ben earlier in the movie, that Mick had been watching them ever since Emu Creek. Finding a set of keys, Liz climbs into a nearby car, and after some fumbling, starts the engine, allowing her to finally relax. Liz, mortally wounded, falls out of the truck. Taking his time, Mick swings his knife, which removes a number of her fingers, before assaulting her, and then finally, in order to discover Christie's location, severs her spine, which leaves her completely paralysed.
Head on a stick?
Remember what I said about this film not following the rules of horror? What they've effectively done is killed off the main character, and the audience's eyes in this movie. Don't kid yourselves, Liz is dead, and she's not coming back. There's no big reveal where she's suddenly alive and well at the end of the movie. War of the Worlds, this is not. This is what I meant when I noted how raw the film is. I can still remember the gasp that went around the room when we saw he was sitting behind her, and the total silence that followed this scene. And this was from guys who'd been sitting there the whole time complaining that nothing was happening in the film. They were totally sucked in by this point too. Christy awakens sometime later, and with no sign of Liz, she does what she was told, and heads for the nearest road. With no one in sight, she just runs, before eventually a passing motorist finds her and helps her into his car. A gunshot off-screen, however, downs the motorist, which kills him. This brings to light some of the foreshadowing from earlier about Mick and his head-shooting days. Christy gets into the car and drives for her life, but Mick easily catches up to her. But in his taunting, Christy forces him off the road. Wild with relief, Mick casually aims his rifle, which blows out her tyres and forces her off the road. Barely conscious, she opens the door and tries to crawl away, only for Mick to coldly shoot her in the back. First from distance, and then from close range. Cold. And then in a beat that can be interpreted many ways, Mick, finally alone, takes in the moment and leaves you as a viewer just wondering what could possibly be going through his mind at this point. He loads Christie's body into the car boot, along with another body, possibly Liz, possibly of the body of the man he just shot, and then sets the car on fire while enjoying a smoke before heading back to the site. En route, Ben awakens, having been crucified in a cave. Well, at least he hasn't been crucified upside down. I've heard that's a real bitch. Hi, I'm Bayless! Managing to free himself, he does the smart thing and runs like hell. Granted, he doesn't know the fates of Liz and Christy, but the guy is bleeding from the wrists, is clearly disorientated and frightened for his life. To me, it almost feels like the more human thing to do. Am I saying that if I was in this situation where I'd been crucified, freed myself, and then had the chance to look for my friends or run for my life, I'd run for my life? I don't know. If anyone out there has ever been in that situation, please, let me know what you did. Ben runs, eventually passing out near a road, and is discovered and driven to safety, where he's eventually airlifted to a hospital, and through the film's epilogue, we see that Ben was held in custody for the suspected murder of Liz and Christy, before eventually being released. And then we get a final shot of Mick, walking into the horizon before fading out. And that's Wolf Creek. It's a film that certainly won't be to everyone's tastes, But with the announcement that they're going to film a sequel with John Jarratt reprising his role as Mick Taylor, it's something I'm interested in seeing. The character of Mick really does come out of this film as a terrifying and unstoppable force, and thanks to some great lighting and camera angles, his very silhouette makes him instantly recognisable and threatening. It also helps that Jarratt throws himself into this role with gusto, and you can't take your eyes off him when he's on screen. If the film had received a more worldwide class of recognition, I could easily see the character of Mick being mentioned in the same breath as Michael Myers or even the most recent horror icon Jigsaw. You can disagree with me if you want to, but I think his performance is just that good. And he is 100 times more scarier than Jigsaw ever was. And this is coming from someone who adores the Saw films. I saw every single Saw film in the cinema, and last year at Halloween, I went as Billy. I also like how the film slowly cuts off its characters from civilization. It starts with them in friendly surroundings and having a great time, and as they journey, they move away from the company of backpackers and people their own age and end up in rogue outback locations, where they really aren't safe, until eventually they're completely alone and cut off. It's slowly handled, and for some people, it could be too slow. But when they're fighting for their lives, you do think back to those images from the beginning of the film when they're surrounded by friends and having a good time. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. With some recommendations. Watch it with the lights off. Watch it with no distractions. And more importantly, don't watch it in a hostel in Australia just before you're about to take a drive to the crater itself.
Rob Walker.
Who?
Doug Walker's brother.
Oh, okay.